Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Hey there, I'm Dion Mitchell with my co-host Mehul and Anjaria. On today's episode of Crime Redefined, we're changing it up a bit. We're keeping it in-house today and bringing our new listeners up to speed on who, what, where, and why. Meanwhile, we're in the back room of Crime Redefined.
That you can see in front of you now.
That's right. Getting some really cool and exciting future episodes ready to go. Is there any of those you want to tease up? Do you want to throw something out there for the listeners?
No, I'm not going to tease. They'll see it.
All right.
But, it's been a while since we've done an episode without a guest, and we've had some awesome guests, and it's fun. But today we're going to do the heavy lifting.
Just real quick, is there anybody that sticks out for you? Any particular guest that just jumps out?
You know what? Like DJ Vodka. All right. So he was the prison guard who was a whistleblower. And the reason I say that he stands out is, I mean, in this era right now where we're looking at police corruption, that story really is topical. And I see him out there just really trying to get his story out there and try to get like a big distributor to latch onto it. And he's just always in the news. It's just so topical. So that's the first thing that really came to mind.
Yeah, that's a great call.
But like I say, today we'll do some of the heavy lifting. And I think it's important for our listeners to get a sense of our background, just so they know where we're coming from on these issues and what our unique point of view is. So Dion, to kind of get us started, obviously in our first episode, we introduced ourselves. We won't go through that whole spiel, but kind of refresh our memory about what your background is and how it is that you started working on a forensics project that you met me on.
Well, that's a great first question, and I didn't see that one coming. Thanks, Mehul. So I spent many, many years as a stunt performer before I made the jump into producing. Boom, boom.
Jump. Okay. It's a good joke. Sorry. I guess I'm a little slow today. It's the lag in the technology.
I'd take a shot at it. I've always had a huge interest in crime. Growing up, I always saw myself, kind of working in, criminal justice. I had a passion for it. I had some friends that, became defense attorneys and some on the other side as well as a prosecution. And I always thought that this would be kind of a really cool collaboration to develop because you have so many worlds that are colliding around an individual case. So I think it's just, an opportunity to tell some really compelling stories.
And did you do some studying of criminal justice in school?
I did.
Also?
And that's probably, obviously where my interest, was sparked. But then opportunities came up in entertainment that I just couldn't pass up. It's not too many times that someone comes and say, hey, do you want to work on this project or that project? And so I just couldn't say no, not knowing it was going to turn into I'll date myself, but a 15, 20 year, career. But at the end of the day, all things are meant to be. And kind of brought me back to my first passion.
Okay. So, Dion, now that you have dated yourself, just in general, what are some of the types of projects that you have worked on?
I was really, right out of the gate, I was really fortunate to be picked up as a double for a Canadian actor and on a show that, ran for 3 or 4 years. And so, opportunities are really few and far between. And the show starred Rick Springfield, which is, really fun to work with. And every day was a big adventure. And I got a chance to work, all over the West Coast while working on that series. So that was probably the one. It was real consistent work, really a lot of fun. I had a great stunt coordinator at the time and a great crew and cast to work with. So I was really fortunate.
Okay. So, and then talk a little bit about the project that brought us together.
Yeah, that was interesting. So once I decided I had, taken enough beatings, I really wanted to get in more of the creative side and producing my own content or being involved with producing original content. And a friend of mine reached out to me, and I was available at the right price. And it was a kind of a wrongful conviction DNA project. I believe it was behind bars, the DNA factor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so as part of my duties was to, find labs and people that could do the testing for us in a short amount of time. And that led me to you. And I think you were just kicking off your private lab, right? If I remember correctly.
It was under construction. I mean, you came to the construction site. And so basically I was involved in co-founding a private lab from the ground up. And we were far along. I think we had the structure pretty well equipped, but we weren't yet doing casework. So I remember you came in with your partners and toured and just kind of, I guess, learned DNA a little bit.
That's right. You were literally wearing a lab coat and, and standing in a hermetically sealed room, which I thought was really interesting itself, and basically giving us the, how to test the 101 on how to test DNA, which was really fascinating.
So, so we have Zero Cliff Media together, right? So now you see the formula. You got the DNA guy, the entertainment guy. Talk a little bit about what ZCM is and why we formed it.
Well, that was it. We wanted to tell, once again, we wanted to tell really compelling stories that were centered around the justice system, criminal justice system, as well as, high profile cases where there was twists and turns. And obviously DNA played a big part of telling that story where we could use your unique skill set. So really that's what it came down to. I think I gave you a call. I was on the 405 at about 5 o'clock and we were just chatting and you were telling me about your, activities from the day. And I remember I was just fascinated. And because the last time you and I had spoke, you literally were wearing a lab coat in a hermetically sealed room.
Yeah, that's right.
Now you're telling me going into, South Central and Compton to the jailhouse there, as well as Men's Central. And I was like, whoa, where's this all coming from?
Yeah. So at that point I was working as an independent consultant and, I remember talking to you. We hadn't touched base in a little while. And I said, well, I'm going to go see a shot caller in jail. And you're like, well, wait a minute. I thought you were a DNA guy. I had to sort of explain that this is what my job is now on the streets and just kind of not just stuck in the lab, but inserting myself into the criminal justice system for the sake of, advancing forensic science. Well, let me go back a little bit then. So we formed ZCM, and then our first project was called Beverly Hills Forensics. So kind of break that down a little bit. How did that start?
That was fun. So we got started on that because we kind of wanted to, pick a lane. And like I said, I thought you had a really unique skill set, and I still do. And what you brought into the criminal justice arena and all in the gray area between all the different players that you were involved with. And it's just, the juxtaposition between Beverly Hills and then South Central and Men's Central Jail, it was an opportunity that we couldn't pass up.
Yeah. So at the time, my firm is MBA DNA Consulting, and my office was in Beverly Hills. And it was just kind of funny because, by day or, during most of my job, I was like at Men's Central Jail, I was going to South Central, all this kind of stuff. And then my office was in Beverly Hills. Well, it was a nice oasis. But number two, the other part of my job was I was working with, high-end defense attorneys. So where are they? They're all on the west side of Los Angeles. So that was the origin of the name and just kind of the juxtaposition of two worlds, which was kind of cool. And so I remember when we were filming the sizzle reel, it was you, me, and then just a crew of two. And I actually took you guys to
piled into your car going down, Olympic Boulevard, I think?
That's right. You guys are taking shots of me and stuff. And then so I actually took you to the parking structure of Men's Central Jail, and we went in and we couldn't go in, but we went up to the door and did some guerrilla filming. So what's kind of some of your memories of that?
Yeah, that was pretty interesting because the other crew members, I think this is the first time that they'd been in the area. So they were a little bug-eyed and, trying to take it all in. And I could see you, this is like, this is just business as usual for you. And then it hits you when you walk up those 3 or 4 steps from the parking garage, and then you see a couple inmates out there lowering the flags for the day, and everything starts to get real, and you realize it's a wake-up call that you don't want any part of this. But at the same time, it was just for that brief little stint of filming. It was really interesting to be, in and around the jail.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember the crew was remarking on in the morning all the beautiful people in Beverly Hills, and then we switched it up for them a little bit.
Yeah. And so I think from there, there was a lot of stories that, they didn't become fully developed. And we thought that there was a great opportunity to, do like a skinny version of those. Right. And then that's where Crime Redefined, the podcast came from. So we would come across, an individual like a DJ Vodka and his book and other authors. And we thought this would be a great platform for us to tell some of the stories that didn't make it to the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. So Beverly Hills Forensics really isn't dead for us. That was just the start, and it's evolved. So, now that core project, we refer to it as Equal Justice. So tell us a little bit about what Equal Justice is and what that's trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's really been an interesting evolution from Beverly Hills Forensics that we've been able to, I think just on our own in the course of developing this, zero in to a really untold story of where you're involved. And that is where wrongful convictions happen. And that's on the front end of a case. I think too many people think it's on the back end. People are incarcerated for a long time. They're you're trying to get them out after they've done 10 or 15 years. And this was a really unique story of how to avoid that and what is involved with trying to stop that before someone's incarcerated for, 15, 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, all the attention is on wrongful convictions overturned by DNA, and that is fantastic. But who's preventing them in the first place? And so there's a machine, the DA, the police department, they're a machine, they're an organization, they're a county agency, but we're all independent contractors out here working on the defense, so it's kind of a ragtag bunch of us. And so I don't know if a lot of people realize that, there's not that infrastructure for the defense.
No, that's one of the things I thought that's interesting about this story. And some of the things that I've learned in the process of developing is the gamesmanship that's played, and how DNA, which everybody looks at as a black and white issue, and it's not. And I don't mean the color of your skin. I just mean either your DNA is there or it's not there. And there's a lot of gray area, and then how that DNA can be manipulated to get a conviction or to get whatever the case is, the outcome that you're looking for, from case to case. It's that extreme.
Yeah. So just to kind of tie in some of our episodes, that was one of our episodes, gray area. So if you go back to, our second or third episode, it was gray area about what you probably don't understand about DNA in terms of its use in the criminal justice system. And then also, I'll talk a little bit about my background too, but in our very first episode, I think we called it Descent into Dark Side. And that's this idea that somehow the prosecution wears the white hat and the defense is the dark side and the evil side. And we know that's not true just in general, but now we have empirical evidence because we see all the wrongful convictions. Before it was like, how often do you actually have a wrongful conviction? Well, now we know. We see a lot of DNA exonerations, but let's face it, how many cases have DNA in them? A very small percentage. So we're only scratching the surface as to how many wrongful convictions are out there. And when we start looking at the reasons for them, it's kind of scary. It's faulty forensics. It's bad eyewitness ID. It's police corruption. There's all kinds of things that we didn't maybe realize the extent of in the system.
Yeah, that's been another eye-opening, I think, development for me in working with you on this, is that, just opening your mind up that there's a lot of variables that go into these decisions and the outcomes of these cases.
Yeah. So one thing that's been fun for me is just kind of learning the entertainment industry a little bit too. Obviously that's not my background. That's, that's your forte, but so it's been interesting, trying to pitch these shows. And so talk a little bit about when when we go to pitch Equal Justice to networks, what were some of their concerns? And then how has that changed in light of, maybe the George Floyd era?
That's a really interesting question on a lot of levels. One is obviously it's all about timing. Is what's the mandate at the moment? What are the networks looking for? What's hot, what's not, and then obviously what's the social consciousness. Right. And I think when we started this, who could have guessed, 4, 5, 6 years later that we would be where we are now as a society. So, pat ourselves on the back a little bit here, is that talk about being ahead of the times with the show where they wouldn't touch it, where now everybody's like, wow, okay, this is really going on. Tell us more about what you're doing. And I think Equal Justice for us is about telling the other side of that story and showing that there is gray area to these cases. And it's not about, really pointing fingers. Is that, you've said this many times, is that, the facts are the facts and the science is the science. It's what people do with those. And so we want to shine a light on that so people understand how the system really works.
Yeah. And I'll be a little bit more blunt. I mean, before the last year, you go to the networks and say, we're not really going to touch something that's going to criticize law enforcement or the police or the system in general. We get it. There's, there's some of the edgier shows about wrongful convictions, but listen, we're about our, cops, we're about our law and order, we're about police procedural, and it's all good. And that's not so, listen, live PD is off the air, cops is off the air. It's a whole different ballgame. So I think now you come in with something that examines the problems in the system, not so much to criticize, but to try to improve it. I actually think networks are a lot more open to it now. So
yeah, we'll see. Obviously it's, like I say, putting your money where your mouth is. Will you, buy those types of shows that, like you said, aren't necessarily critical, but they shine a spotlight on where the holes are in the system and where people are falling through.
Yeah, that's right. So, okay, Dion, now that you're sort of working in the field of criminal justice, how has your attitude towards the system changed?
I think part of it I already touched on. It's really, the defense versus the prosecution, the gamesmanship, how the DNA findings are manipulated one way or another, and so on. And I think that's I don't know. I think, you're naive and you just think everything is kind of, clear cut, and it's not anywhere close to that. Yeah, and obviously the money that's involved within the system, either you have it or you don't, which plays a big part to whether or not, you're going to have a successful trial or not.
Well, two comments, it's like you hear, well, someone who's got a lot of money, they're going to do better in court, but all they're really doing is leveling the playing field, right? Because what people don't understand is the prosecutor's office, they've got, I don't want to say unlimited resources, but they got a ton of resources, and they're going against someone who's maybe indigent, and they don't realize, I think that there's that leveling that there needs to be. So somebody has money and they can actually investigate their case properly is what I'm trying to say. Like they can hire the proper investigators, the experts, the attorney. It's not cheating. It's leveling the playing field to what the prosecution has to get a more equitable result.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I ever thought that the playing field was 100% level. I probably, as far as like what I've learned, I didn't think the discrepancy between the two sides was as big as it really is. I think that's right. One of the biggest factors that you come away with.
And so also like the certainty of science, we've seen the criticism now, the rightful criticism in the last few years, right? Some of these forensic techniques like bite marks and hair comparison that people went to jail or were maybe executed because of, that's falling apart, right? So you look at DNA and say, oh, well, DNA is not like that, but in certain cases it is. And we've talked about this ad nauseum, but not all DNA results are the same. So even DNA as a science and application to the criminal justice system is under fire as well. So, it's really an interesting time and an awakening.
And that's right. And that's what obviously we're trying to accomplish with equal justice is shine a light, show how, your skill set and this gamesmanship happens in particular cases.
All right. So we've done, 20 some episodes of Crime Redefined. What's your favorite aspect of working on this podcast, Dion?
Well, one, working with you, I learn something new, every day. And I think I know it's such a, I don't know, I hope it's not a cop out, but it's really just the guests. There's no way that I would have, come in contact with, probably 90% of the people that we've had on our show.
Sure, yeah.
Anywhere from an psychic investigator, Beth Deering, to, like you mentioned, DJ, a lot of the book authors. These have been really some amazing stories that, hopefully we've done a good job in interviewing and then relaying that on to our listeners. But that's been obviously the most fun and the most interesting is
right.
Finding these people or them reaching out to us, coming up with questions that they hadn't been asked 1,000 times and really trying to get something new that, maybe they didn't, no one had ever asked them that they hadn't shared with anybody yet. How about you?
That's the best feeling when someone says, "Wow, that's a great question. I hadn't thought of that," or "Nobody's asked me that." I mean,
we're always trying
what it's all about.
Yeah, we're always trying to get at least one of those. That's our little goal. We're always trying to get one or two of those per podcast. So that's been a lot of fun. And so far, I think we're batting 1,000.
I think so. Yeah, it's all about research.
Okay, so enough of me. Let's get on to you. So in case
do I need to swear in here?
That's right. In case everyone just missed, the first episode, why don't you go ahead and give us a little bit of we've given you, a pretty good detailed case so far, but why don't you fill in the blanks for us?
Yeah. So just kind of bottom line, I've worked in the field of forensic science for about 24 years, 21 of that specifically in forensic DNA analysis. First 3 years of my career, I worked in a law enforcement crime lab, but I was working in the investigation of meth labs. And back in the 90s, that was a big problem, particularly in Southern California. In fact, the county I worked in, San Bernardino, was really like the world headquarters for meth labs. So I got a ton of experience doing that. But what I really wanted to do was work in DNA. But back in the day, you didn't just go right into DNA. You had to pay your dues a little bit.
Right.
So after 3 years,
why DNA? I mean, was there a specific reason?
Oh, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Because I studied biochemistry in college, and I was most interested in DNA and molecular biology. But I don't know that I wanted to be a lab rat necessarily. So I'll remember, I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago, and there was a career fair probably in my junior or senior year. And I remember the Illinois State Police was there. And I started talking to them about, DNA in a crime lab. And I had no idea this was a career option. I thought it was all sworn people who did that, who were cops. And these days, that's not really the case. So for me, it was an opportunity to work in the type of science that I liked, but to be in a profession where you weren't just stuck in the lab necessarily. In other words, You could go to court, you could go to crime scenes, and it had that cool factor. Forensics was starting to become cool then, and that was right about the time that O.J. Simpson, the trial started, and got all sorts of exposure. So that's really what ultimately sold me
for that. Yeah,
right.
So, what was the connection and what was the hook? Obviously, my pitch worked, and going after your ego. What was your interest in forming Zero Cliff Media?
Well, I guess I haven't really finished my background. So,
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So then I started my DNA career in law enforcement in San Bernardino County. And, I went out, I got my master's. I became what's known as the technical leader of the laboratory. And then a friend of mine, a coworker, had this crazy idea that, there's a big need for private labs out there. Why don't we go out and start one? So somehow or another, I got talked into being an entrepreneur. And then we started up a private lab. And I was the laboratory director, technical lead, all of this kind of stuff. But that's where I started changing my focus. So, I was doing casework for law enforcement, but we were also doing casework for the defense. And that was my first exposure to that. And on top of that, I learned about the phenomenon of pro pers, that is inmates who are acting as their own attorneys. So at that point, when I was at the private lab, I started actually going to jail, working with the pro pers, working with defense attorneys, and not just doing lab work, but doing consultation, reviewing the work of other laboratories, testifying. So I started sort of crossing over, if you will. And that's why I call it, quote, my descent into the dark side. So now really for the last 10, 11 years, I'm fully working for the defense as a consultant. So when you and I sort of reconnected, I wanted to start doing stuff that was, I guess, a little more cool. I'd escaped from the laboratory, and I knew that forensics was big in the media. And I thought, well, I've got a well-rounded background in this, and I'd like to see what I can contribute to what's out there in the media, basically. So in terms of forming Zero Cliff Media, really two reasons. Obviously, working with you was the impetus. And my thought was, hey, listen, we went out and shot Beverly Hills Forensics, and I thought we did pretty damn good for amateurs. I mean, we were kind of getting the ear of the networks, and we were probably naive and thought we were going to get a sale, and of course we didn't, but I thought we did quite well. And I thought, there's something here. Let's make this official. Let's start a company. I'm glad we did, because we've had some hits. We've got executive producer credits. Zero Cliff has, produced in conjunction with credits. And the other part of the equation was separately, I was getting hit up by a bunch of people because, now I had an online presence. I had some video content out there as being seen more, and people were like, hey, would you like to participate in this show?
Folks are reaching out to you as an expert, say, hey, can you jump on board here and there?
It's right. So I thought, well, I would like to have control of the content because I don't want to be a part of misrepresenting forensic science. And I thought I could bring something a little bit more educated to what's out there in the media right now sometimes. So I thought, again, let me do it under the flag of Zero Cliff Media and, work with you to develop our own content and control our destiny.
Yeah. And the messaging behind it, because you're right. There's a lot of kind of just, misrepresenting what, the DNA and how it works in a case. And sometimes people giving that expert information aren't really experts. So it was a good opportunity to kind of, develop the company and, like you said, control the messaging.
Yeah, that, and also give a voice to the defense, just to point out that this is not all cut and dried. Bad things happen. People are entitled to a fair defense, and really some of the struggles that the defense side has. So it was a great fit. It's just been a lot of fun.
Let's talk about one of the hottest topics that are out there right now, and that's genetic genealogy. Tell me about your exposure to it. Yeah.
So, obviously we covered this 2 years ago when the Golden State Killer was busted by genealogy. That was all the rage. Our episode, I think, is called A New Era of DNA Investigations. So depending on how you define, well, first of all, Dion, do you have an hour?
Yeah. Let's go. It'll be a 2-part episode.
Yeah. Okay. So depending on how you define genetic genealogy, it's actually been around for quite a while. So the idea in DNA is that obviously the more closely related we are, the more DNA we share, right? I get half my DNA from my mom, half of my DNA from my dad. And so early on, people were looking at genetic markers that were passed down. So in other words, like YSTRs are male specific and they are passed down a paternal line. So you could do some crude ancestry just with YSTRs. So one example is there was a big database of people who tested their YSTRs and they kept track of what the last name of those people were. So for example, if you did a case, right, and you had a YSTR DNA profile that didn't match anybody, you could go to these databases of surnames and see if there was a hit and possibly investigate the case that way. So 5 or 6 years ago, I was involved in a case that did just that. I had no idea what this was. And I don't know how the defense attorney locked into this, but he was working with Colleen Fitzpatrick, who is really one of the giants in genealogy, and kind of introduced me to this. And this could be done actually on the maternal side. You might have heard of mitochondrial DNA passed down through the maternal line. So you could trace back your heritage then. And obviously, direct-to-consumer DNA testing wasn't that big 10, 15 years ago because they were using these markers that they gave you some information, but not a lot. Well, obviously, people checking out their ancestry, direct-to-consumer DNA testing. I'm going to plug another episode, right? We interviewed Libby, right, the author of The Lost Family. So check that out. She gives a great history of this. So what happened was more and more people were testing their DNA, and the DNA markers were much powerful. They weren't just tied to your mother's side, your dad's side. It was your DNA combined. So you could really check your heritage. It was much more powerful. So people might go to Ancestry.com. They might go to 23andMe. Well, those databases don't talk to each other, right? So I'd have to test in both of them to have access to that. But then there became a cottage industry of genealogy, and there were public access databases where I could take my data from 23andMe, you could take yours from Ancestry.com, and they would talk to each other in this database. Well, of course, that caught the attention of law enforcement, right? And so the first big case we hear about is Golden State Killer, but that wasn't even the first case solved by genealogy. And as a matter of fact, one way I learned about this was doing research for media appearances. So Sky News was doing a story on genetic genealogy that I was interviewed on. I really researched that quite a bit. Discovery ID had a little a show called Crime Obsession, and they were following a case called the Bear Brook murders, which I had actually never heard of until they approached me. And I started looking at that and studying it, and that actually predated the Golden State Killer. So Golden State Killer made the news, but this has been involved for a long time. Okay, well, how does this, after all that, how does this work? let's start with a simple case, right? Let's say it's a rape case. And let's say that there's semen collected from the vaginal swab of a victim. A lot of DNA. You have a clear profile of a male, right? You've got great data, but you don't know who the suspect is, right? So maybe the cops do some investigation and they get some samples from some males. You make that comparison, they're eliminated. Okay, well, what are you going to do now? Maybe there's a dragnet in the neighborhood, and they get 500 DNA samples from everybody within 50 miles. Let's say all of those people are eliminated by DNA. Well, the straightforward path that you do in the existing infrastructure is to enter that profile into what's known as CODIS, or the Combined DNA Index System. That's a database that I think a lot of people have heard about. It's maintained by the FBI. And right now there's probably 20 million profiles in there of convicted offenders, arrestees, depending on the state and what their rules are, and other cases that are either solved or unsolved. So you would take your DNA profile from this rape and you'd put it in CODIS. If you hit somebody, great. You go find them, you get a new sample from them, you swab their mouth, you confirm that it's them, case is solved. And you may not get a hit right away because every day there's more and more samples added to CODIS. So you might have a cold case that one day you get a call and says, you know what, you hit in the database, this guy was just arrested a month ago. Well, let's say that doesn't happen. Now what do? Well, you can do a special type of search in CODIS called a familial search. So again, the idea is that close relatives like parents, offspring, and siblings, they're going to share a fair amount of DNA. So you might take this crime scene profile and talk to the people of CODIS. You have to make a special case. They don't do this all the time. Got to be very serious. It's got to go to a committee, on and on. The reason is you are not looking for a direct hit. You're looking to see if there's potentially a close relative in the CODIS database. So the best example of this is the Grim Sleeper that we didn't have an episode dedicated to it, but we talked about this. So in that case, of course, they had DNA from several murders, and they did a familial search in CODIS, and they got a hit. And said, you know what? It looks like potentially the son of the Grim Sleeper is in the database. So they go and track down dad. He's at a pizza parlor. They take his pizza, his utensils, boom, and they confirm it. Well, that's cool. So we've expanded, right? We've got the 20 million people in CODIS. Pretty good, right? It'd be great if we had everybody's DNA. I mean, in terms of crime solving. But if you then go to, well, let's look at siblings, parents, and offsprings. Now you got even a bigger dragnet, right? Well, what if you could take that out even further? And that's what genetic genealogy is. So because the genetic markers that they're looking at are so powerful, right? We know this because we do Ancestry.com. We know all of a sudden, I'm 20% European, this and that. And you're finding people who are like your second cousin. So why wouldn't law enforcement leverage that to try to reach more people? Okay, so let's say I've exhausted CODIS. I've exhausted familial searching. Well, let me try one other trick, right? So let me do what's called phenotyping, DNA phenotyping, which means I can take DNA, send it to a specialized lab, and they're going to look for markers that tell physical characteristics of this rapist, right? What's their hair color? What's their eye color? Do they have freckles? What's their ancestry? And there are companies who will then generate call it a genetic mugshot, which is really just an investigative lead. Like, hey, your guy or your woman might look like this. It's not going to solve the case, but it's going to help the investigation. Well, that same technology, okay, it's called SNPs, or single nucleotide polymorphisms. That is that powerful type of testing that's used in this direct-to-consumer DNA testing, Ancestry.com, 23andMe. So now, let's say from my original vaginal swab, I take some of that DNA and I send it to a specialized lab to do SNP testing. Now I can upload that DNA profile into one of these open source databases like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. And I might not hit on my rapist, but I might get a distant relative of that rapist. So it could be a second cousin or a third cousin. Then a genealogist comes into play and says, well, wait a minute, who is the common ancestor of the rapist and this family member that's hit? And then they do all their triangulation and family trees and all this kind of stuff. And they pinpoint on a few people. So then they have to go out and say, well, I'll use you as an example, Dion. I think I did this in our Golden State Killer thing. I think based on genealogy, I think I got a guy and I think it's Dion. Well, how am I going to prove that? I got to get DNA from him. Well, I can't get a search warrant because I'm just doing this genealogy, investigative lead type thing. So, the cops would follow you, Dion. They'd say, did you drop a cigarette? Did you drop a water bottle? They're going to pick your trash, right? They're going to test that DNA. If that hits the original crime scene, boom, probable cause to now go arrest you, take a swab from your mouth and confirm the hit. So that's the power of genealogy. And obviously that's the new frontier now in forensic DNA. And this is something we're hearing more and more about.
It's a really great breakdown. I think all the listeners, hopefully that's a great way to make it understand, so everybody can understand.
Well, you're still awake, so that, that's a good sign.
There's a lot of good passion there. And it makes me want to ask this question. Do you miss working in a lab?
I really don't. If I could work in a lab once every 2-3 weeks or something like that, that would be fun because there's a lot of new toys, a lot of new technologies and stuff that, I didn't use when I worked in a laboratory. But now that I'm out of the lab, I cannot imagine being cooped up in the laboratory. And I think there's plenty of people who do that kind of work. I don't think there's a lot of people who want to leave that safety, who want to go to the jail, who want to deal with, prosecutors and stuff. So I think that this is how I can make my contribution to the justice system. And I think there's not many of us. So I think that's what I need to be doing.
Definitely what you do is not for everybody.
That I'm out, I'm sorry, but now that I'm out and about, I just can't see being cooped up again.
Yeah, I can see that. But also what you do is really not for everybody. It's really, takes someone who's got the, the skill set and the patience and the mindset to be able to do what you do on a daily basis.
Right.
I want to put this question in there because you've mentioned it a couple of times to me, but you've actually never told me the story. But you told me one time that you inadvertently made like a racially insensitive comment or something during a presentation. And I'm pretty sure you've never told me, but I hate to call you out and share it with all of our listeners, but if you don't mind, tell me what that was about.
Well, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't a comment, but at the risk of embarrassing myself, really to make a point, I'll tell the story. About 5-6 years ago, I was giving a presentation to a bunch of private investigators about DNA, of course. And this was kind of like an all-day seminar, probably at least 4 or 5 hours of lectures. So I had all my PowerPoints and I had my great images and my case examples and all of this and, good crowd. So I went in the morning, did the first 2-3 hours or whatever, was feeling really good about it. I thought it was going good. And at the lunchtime, an African-American gentleman came up to me. He said, I really enjoy your presentation. I'm learning a lot. He goes, but I got a bone to pick with you. I thought, okay, we're going to have a scientific.
What were your first thoughts when he said that?
Okay, so my first thoughts was, okay, we're going to have a little scientific debate or something like that, or maybe I said something that was too defense biased or too prosecution biased or something like that. And he said, in one of your slides, you showed a image of a pimp. So I guess I should give some background. One of my case examples was a pretty interesting case about a prostitute and a pimp. And in my PowerPoint slide, I put up this image that I don't know where I got it. I probably Googled prostitute and pimp, but it was a very stereotypical view of, like a black guy with like a purple suit and a big fuzzy hat and all of that kind of stuff. And he's like, as far as, in the black community, we don't need that. We got enough problems with stereotypes. And man, I was floored, because obviously that was the furthest thing from my intent.
Right.
I didn't mean anything by that whatsoever. But I have to tell you that I was shook. So during lunch, I was thinking, wow, I'm thinking, I'm kind of a criminal justice warrior here. And this doesn't look good. So the rest of the day, it just really was in the back of my mind. And I don't think I was as effective. And, it's my bad. And so just today, I hadn't looked at that image in a while, but I did a Google search on it, an image search. So this is the description of what it was. A pimp named Slickback is a fictional character from Adult Swim's The Boondocks TV series, voiced by comedian Cat Williams. And listen to this. He is a stereotypical example of a pimp. So, there you go. My bad. But I bring this up as an example of, we do these things unconsciously because maybe it's ingrained. We don't realize the harm that we're doing. Just because it's a stereotype and just because it's common doesn't mean that it's cool, and it doesn't mean that you're really disrespecting people. So I'm going to take one for the team here and be embarrassed, but really to bring that point up.
Teaching moment for sure.
Teaching moment. Yes, exactly.
What's your favorite part of doing the Crime Redefined podcast?
I think that I kind of like not so much doing the research. Although it's been fun reading the books. We get free books to read. That's kind of cool.
Right.
But doing the research and then distilling that down into how you're going to present it and how you're going to present it in a novel way that brings in both of our strengths, because we don't want to
that's actually a fun part of this collaboration is because, giving a little kind of, behind the scenes look of how we do this, we'll get the books will be sent out. We'll read them. We'll both individually make our notes, and then we kind of morph that into our questioning and our research. And that process in itself is really interesting just because our backgrounds are so different.
Well, that's it. I mean, there's a million people covering different issues and criminal cases and maybe just parroting what's out there in the research. But I like to filter that through my expertise. And like you said, I really like giving our guests hopefully a good experience in that they're not just, if there's someone who's done a lot of interviews, let's throw something different at them. Let's give them a different point of view. Let's put everything through the Crime Redefined to filter so that even if it's something, we've had some flyers, right? We had Kung Lee on here, who's an MMA legend. We've had the psychic, but kind of like my role in our TV development is that even if we do something that's not crime, I'm going to bring in that scientific mind to it, that investigation template and that sort of thing. So
that's definitely our backbone, is to always, be as factual, use as much science as we can in our storytelling.
Yeah. But I mean, also when you produce a podcast, and it's actually good practice for a lot of things in life. It's great practice for public speaking.
That's a good point.
And just, keeping your reading, your research skills sharp, your reading skills sharp. And then obviously we're building a lot of great alliances. I mean, a lot of these people that we've talked to, I remember Fernando Bermudez in particular. He's like, we're partners for life now,
that's right.
Spread the word. So it's been cool.
That was a really interesting story as well. That's one where you're just riveted on every word that he's saying. And I think what was really amazing about him was how he was telling a story is so matter of fact. I mean, you'd think that someone would be like just bitter and angry at the world for going through that. And at the end of the day,
absolutely,
he didn't do it. They had the wrong guy. He had such a great attitude. That's my biggest takeaway from that interview was he had such a great attitude. It's not holding back from going forward in his life. That's for sure.
That's right. So we've got a lot of, exciting guests lined up or, potentially in the pipeline. So, hopefully our skills are getting better and we'll extract even more.
Our listeners are, hopefully our listeners are having a good time and learning something new. Definitely we want to thank everybody. It's been incredible the amount of downloads that we received on a daily basis. So that's really been a lot of fun too.
Yeah, that is. And I really appreciate, we appreciate all the followers that we're getting, and we're starting to expand our social media and trying to put more content out there. And, that's part of the reason we're videotaping today, because I think, people want to see stuff as well. So
that's right.
We hope to keep pumping up the Instagram and the YouTube and all that, and just try to make this as interactive and educational as well as entertaining.
Yeah, it was kind of fun to do a little freestyle today. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of time we cover some really, either heavy or academic topics, and it's kind of nice just to mix it up a little bit and show a little personality.
Yeah, no, for sure. It was nice to kind of stretch your legs a little bit. And you're right. And this just goes to any criminal justice practitioner. It gets dirty, it gets dark, it gets deep, and you've got to have that escape valve. So I do like stuff like this, or even when you just do an episode that's a little bit lighter. So, you got to mix it up. And I guess we were sort of in line with the more laid back quarantine style today.
Yeah, it was just kind of nice just to have some fun and, let people know what we're about, beyond just doing these interviews.
Right, absolutely.
So, I think on that, it's like, we hope today's episode prompts you to look into our catalog, our listeners to look into our catalog of past episodes and continue to listen to new ones. This is actually episode number 27. So we have a fair amount of content that's out there for everybody. And you can find our episodes at crimeredefined.com. Also, for our deaf and hard of hearing fans, as well as our non-English speaking fans, we have transcripts posted for 2 episodes with more to follow. Please interact with us on social media. We're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And be sure to stay safe and healthy.
Hear, hear, and remember, hashtag Crime Redefined.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.